Black History Month. It's a time where we not only honor a dream, but recognize key moments in our nation's history, from refusing to give up a seat on a bus to breaking color barriers in sports. African Americans' fight for equality has opened doors across the universe that many would have never thought possible. As we continue to unearth stories lost for too long, today we also look to the next generation, opening new doors and making their own mark on history.
Thank you for joining us, everyone. I'm Tammy Fields. Throughout the next hour, we will be highlighting the contributions of Black Americans, not only across our state, but also across the world. Where we're joining you from right now is one of those places that really highlights African American history. We're talking about the Wells-Built Museum of African American History and Culture. What you now see as a museum was actually once the Wells-Built Hotel. Dr. William Monroe Wells built the hotel at a nearby entertainment venue, all in an effort to provide lodging to African Americans during the segregation era. The hotel served host to several iconic African Americans, including Ella Fitzgerald, Thurgood Marshall, and Jackie Robinson. Now, this location has become a prime spot to visit during Black History Month. Across the I-4 corridor, another museum has also brought in pretty big crowds. We're talking about the Carter G. Woodson Museum. It is located in St. Petersburg. Woodson was an American historian and author, and in February of 1926, he launched the celebration of Negro History Week, the precursor of Black History Month. Spectrum News' Trevor Pettiford takes a closer look into what Black History Month is all about.
St. Petersburg's Woodson African American Museum of Florida carries Dr. Carter G. Woodson's name. But it was more than a century ago that Dr. Woodson cradled, carried, and researched the history of Black Americans until it grew into what we now know as Black History Month. Woodson is best known as the father of Black history. So to begin to understand the history of Black history, we have to begin with the history of Carter G. Woodson. Woodson was born the son of former slaves on December 19, 1875. As a teenager working in the coal mines of Virginia, he started his education late, but quickly caught up, earning degrees at Berea College, the University of Chicago, and becoming only the second Black person to earn a PhD from Harvard.
He went on to do extraordinary things as not only a professor, but a journalist and a historian.
But Woodson African American Museum of Florida Executive Director Terry Lispy Scott says Dr. Woodson realized something in history was missing.
Carter G. Woodson, as a historian himself, recognized the absence of African American history to Americans' culture. And with that, he created what began as Negro History Week in 1926.
Scheduled for the second week of February between Abraham Lincoln and Frederick Douglass's birthdays, Negro History Week was celebrated by many across the country, but not by everyone.
That was not a part of the curriculum for Pinellas County. Black history was not.
In 1957, Delcita Harris Thompson started teaching second grade in St. Petersburg. Segregation only allowed her to teach Black children, but she says teaching them about Black history was still difficult.
I only told my children about what I had learned in high school. George Washington Carver, Marian Anderson, Booker T. Washington, and Mary McLeod Bethune. I was an adult, a young adult, before I heard about Carter G. Woodson.
In the 70s, Black college students and professors in Ohio pushed to expand Negro History Week to a month. And in 1976, Jimmy Carter became the first president to recognize Black History Month. It changed so much for so many.
It made me aware that, I had missed out on, even in high school and even in my early teaching career, that I had missed out on Negro History Week.
Dr. Woodson died in 1950. Some believe he remains a hidden figure in the very history he spent his life cultivating, which is why the Woodson African American Museum of Florida bears his name and follows his singular belief.
Our stories are Black history, but more important, our stories are American history.
In St. Petersburg, Trevor Pettiford, Spectrum News.
While the month is all about celebrating the achievements of Black Americans, it's also a time to remember a very dark past. Throughout the 17th and 18th centuries, people were kidnapped from the continent of Africa, forced into slavery in the American colonies, and exploited to work in the production of crops such as tobacco and cotton. One thing that gave enslaved people a lot of hope about their future, though, was their faith. Our Dahlia Dangerfield reports now from Tampa about a historic church by the name of St. Paul AME. It's where iconic figures such as Rosa Parks and Martin Luther King Jr. worshiped.
If these bricks could talk, oh, the stories they would tell about faith and the struggles for equality.
Amen, amen.
All happening around the century-old walls of St. Paul AME in downtown Tampa. Pete Edwards is a lifelong member.
This church has always been the church of civil rights.
Inside, the church looks a lot different these days. The building is now a community center in an affordable housing neighborhood. One single church pew remains.
Sometime in my darkest moments, I come and I meditate upstairs. I sit here.
Founded in the late 1800s by a former slave, the church grew from a simple hut to the largest building owned by blacks in downtown. Growing up, Pete remembers some of the movers and shakers who visited during segregation.
It was so many leaders, at times we couldn't put one on top of the other.
Including the first black U.S. Supreme Court justice. As a lawyer, Thurgood Marshall organized a successful lawsuit here to provide equal pay to black teachers.
I ain't gonna let nobody turn me around, keep marching up the freedom land. That's what we say.
Civil rights activist Clarence Fort walked the grounds. In 1960, he led youth marches from this very spot because it was so close to downtown.
Then we walk this way, which is west.
They headed to the Woolworth store for a sit-in, fighting so blacks could sit at the all-white lunch counter.
Those were the times. It really seemed like it was just yesterday, but we made a lot of progress. Yeah.
At one time, St. Paul AME, it was the place to be, with hundreds of members, the site of the civil rights movement. But by early 2000, a lot of people just stopped coming. They ran out of money and the place was falling apart. After the last service, developers stepped in to save the historical landmark. They restored the church to its original beauty.
We're happy that we were able to restore it, but most of all happy that we can tell the stories.
This place, it has withstood a lot.
A Walk of Legends honors the church's role in civil rights. Pete passes by it often. He actually lives in the affordable housing community next door.
You brothers and sisters, the purpose of the church is to glorify God.
And on Sundays, a few miles away, the heart of the church sings on in East Tampa.
He's still watching over St. Paul.
A new building, a smaller congregation. But they remain bonded by the miracle of St. Paul AME. Amen. No matter where it's located. In Tampa, I'm Dahlia Dangerfield for Spectrum News.
Imagine burying your loved ones only to have structures built over their burial grounds. Across the nation, more and more African American graves are being found. Ahead, we look at what led to their covering and efforts now underway to honor what was once forgotten. Black History Month, exploring Florida's history, continues after the break.
When I think about Black History Month, I think about how it's a time to celebrate all that my ancestors have had to overcome. I think about the battle that they won. And then I also think that it's a time to reflect and acknowledge what happened back in those times. Slavery, all the injustices that we face and still face today. And then the third thing is to teach people. I think Black History Month is a perfect way to teach people of our rich history. There's libraries you can go to, events you can go to just understand the history.
Learning our history, it is important, but what do you do when that history is buried over? It is something that has happened over and over across our country when it comes to Black cemeteries. But as our Sandra Weathers shows us, there is now a renewed effort to uncover those historic cemeteries and preserve them.
A paved parking lot is the last place you would expect to be someone's final resting place. But right here where I'm standing, there are bodies buried underneath. It's part of a lost African-American cemetery that was ignored and covered up for years. It's a familiar story in African-American communities all over the country, and one people here in this community are determined to tell.
There was your aunt?
Yeah, your aunt too.
Your mom too. Yeah.
That's the kind of laughter Carlton Childs and his cousin Bernard Dixon can remember filling their family homes as children.
That's our great-grandmother.
Bernard is the older cousin, so his memory stretches a little further back.
Here was, you would go into the parsonage.
Right.
Whether it's the sound of singing or church bells ringing,
he would tone the bell. And you could hear the bell all over Clearwater.
He can remember it all.
Death was thong, thong. That means someone dead.
For years, that death tone went quiet. What was once the St. Matthew's Baptist Church Cemetery was sold and developed with the assumption that the bodies were relocated.
The grave markers was removed. And so I could only assume that with them moving the markers that the graves was moved.
But we now know that not one, but two Clearwater African-American cemeteries are still here, underneath buildings, roadways, and parking lots.
It does not surprise me because so much of this has happened. I've seen it. You know, with my own eyes, no one had to tell me this.
North Greenwood Cemetery is under and around the vacant Curtis Fundamental Middle School, and St. Matthew's Baptist Church Cemetery is under the Frank Crum Company's Clearwater property. Dixon has loved ones at both.
Do they mean something to me? Yes, they was my neighbors. You know, they was my kindred. So they're part of me. If they was not related to me, they are still part of me. Because this is family. This is community. This is who we are. This is part of us.
All of those red markings are graves.
Carlton took us to the former mostly African-American Clearwater Heights neighborhood near one of those erased cemeteries.
Right here is Leroy Dixon's property. This was my grandfather.
His great-grandfather, Mac Dixon, was one of the first African-American settlers in Clearwater in 1905.
He was a railroad worker, and he was what you would consider to be well off. Had some money, and with that money, he bought this whole area from Court Street to Cleveland Street.
This is an old map of Zion Cemetery.
That's the kind of African-American history anthropologist and USF professor Dr. Antoinette Jackson says is usually researched in a cemetery.
You're missing a large percentage of your history if you are excluding African-American history, and particularly that comes through the cemeteries.
Her research project surrounding the erasure of African-American cemeteries started in the Tampa Bay area.
In 1951, this picture here shows that when they were first building the housing complex, they came across bones and indicating that something was there, a cemetery was there, but they kept building.
But when her and her partners launched the Black Cemeteries Network website, they quickly realized there are even more.
The farthest, I think, west we have on the map right now is, I think, out toward Texas, and then further down, like right near the border of Mexico. We have sites on there from there, and as far north as all the way up through the Cape Cod.
Dr. Jackson is working with state and local leaders to help with solutions.
Oh, this is very important. I mean, this is like a first step or a second step.
Zebby Atkinson with the Clearwater NAACP says this new state marker at North Greenwood Cemetery is part of a long list of possibilities.
The community has come up with a list of several things that they would like to have happen. One of those things is to move the people that are still at the St. Matthew's Baptist Cemetery site over to the North Greenwood site so that they can be properly memorialized.
Whether there's a memorial wall or a relocation of all the graves to one site with a museum, Carlton and Bernard want something done, and they want it done soon.
It's part of the weight that we carry.
The community and its stakeholders, which includes the school district and the Frank Crum Company, will come together and ultimately decide how they plan to right these wrongs. In Clearwater, Sandra Weathers, Spectrum News.
According to the Black Cemetery Network's website, there are 17 erased African American cemeteries, but anthropologists believe there could be many more. Teaching history one step at a time. Ahead on Spectrum News, we take you on a special Black History tour led by a man who's made history himself. Black History Month, exploring Florida's history, continues after the break.
Black History Month is so special to me because it gives me the opportunity to look at my ancestors and see all of their great accomplishments and how they paved the way for me. Also, it gives us an opportunity to look at just all the great things that Black people have done, not only for the country, but for the entire world. So it's such an honor, and I always love celebrating Black History Month.
Teaching Black history has now become a hot topic of discussion across our state. But one Tampa Bay area man is making it his mission to make sure that history stays alive. Our Caitlin Wilson takes us on one of his very special Black History tours.
The quiet tranquility of this space doesn't go unnoticed by those who come to pay their respects, especially those who know the profound history of the Oaklawn Cemetery.
There's a marker here also.
Fred Hearns is one of those people.
This reads, "To the slaves buried in Oaklawn Cemetery, in peace, sleep on, God's hands, each broken heart will mend."
Born and raised in Tampa, he's seen the area grow and change over the decades. He later went on to study at the University of South Florida and obtained a master's degree in Africana Studies.
This is Israel Tillman, my grandfather.
All of that leading to a 32-year career with the city of Tampa as the director of community affairs. Eventually, though, retiring to take on a passion project.
And that was the year I formed Fred Hearns Tours, LLC. And since that time, I've done tours, over 300 tours, primarily bus tours and walking tours of historic Black neighborhoods in Tampa, Florida.
His tour company and illustrious reputation eventually leading to his current gig, curator of Black history at the Tampa Bay History Center, where he brought not only his knowledge to this role, but also his unique tours.
Creating the tours and leading so many tours has meant so much to me because I realized many years ago that there was so much incredible history all around us made by African and African American people, and we knew very little of it.
Now offering walking tours once a month at the History Center, ones that take guests to the area of Central Avenue West that at one point was known as the Harlem of the South. It was founded during a post-Civil War era and was almost 100% populated by African Americans. Early in the 1900s, many lived in poverty. But over the years, the area changed and saw dozens of Black-owned businesses set up shop in the area, creating a safe haven and community for Black people during a time of segregation. And this area, once known as the Scrub or the Harlem of the South, It's obviously changed quite a bit over the decades, but there's still remnants to the past. Take this church, the St. James Episcopal Church, built in 1918. It actually still looks very similar to when it was built over 100 years ago. Spots like this one make up the tours Fred takes you on, showcasing the history of this area. Walking through Perry Harvey Park with their unique art installations, and strolling through Oakland Cemetery, where the unmarked graves of previously enslaved people were laid to rest.
Every major accomplishment that has happened in this city has involved, one way or the other, black people. And so learning the history of this community was important to me because I really didn't learn much of that history growing up here and living here for almost all of my life.
In Tampa, Caitlin Wilson, Spectrum News.
Each walking tour takes about 90 minutes, and it even goes through an area where Ray Charles made his first recording. Imagine wanting to get a higher education, but being told no simply because of the color of your skin. There was a time in our nation's history where that was sadly common, which led to the birth of historically black colleges and universities. Coming up, we explore the history of HBCUs and the challenges they still face today. Black History Month, exploring Florida's history, continues after the break.
When I think about Black History Month, I think about everything that my ancestors have done for me, like going all the way back from Rosa Parks, Dr. King, Harriet Tubman, and so many others. I also feel like it's a time for us to celebrate how far we have come so far in terms of society and all the social groups out there like Black Lives Matter and all the other ones that we don't know about that are in the background just working to bridge a gap between the social injustices that are currently going on today.
Historically black colleges and universities, also known as HBCUs, like this one in Daytona Beach. They were established in the United States in the 19th century to provide undergraduate and graduate level educational opportunities to people of African descent. Black students were unwelcome at existing public and private institutions of higher education, even after the passing of specific legislation, and that resulted in a lack of higher education opportunities. Spectrum News' Curtis McLeod explores the history of HBCUs from one of 4 in our state, Bethune-Cookman University.
Lift every voice and sing till earth and heaven ring with the harmonies of bliss. Lift every voice and sing.
This shall always be before me as a great interracial garden.
Bethune-Cookman librarian Irvin Ross loves reading.
Where men and women of all tongues, all nations, all creeds, all classes blend together, helping to send out sunshine and love and peace and brotherhood that makes a better world in which we live.
And that quote he's reading here is a favorite, directly from his best friend's grandmother. But before I tell you more about his best friend and that grandmother, let me first tell you about Mr. Ross's passion for historically black colleges and universities, specifically Bethune-Cookman University.
We've always said that here at Bethune-Cookman University, we get to know our students by their names and not by numbers.
He has first-hand knowledge on the inner workings of HBCUs. You see, Mr. Ross has worked at BCU for nearly 50 years. He's also a member of the graduating class of 1973. He left life on the farm in his hometown of Hastings, Florida, for Daytona Beach.
So we had the opportunity to come down and participate in the parade, homecoming parade, on an annual basis. So I fell in love with the marching men of Bethune-Cookman University.
But it wasn't easy. His dream of a college education nearly deferred.
I said, well, I've got to go back home because I don't have enough money. They said, no, you're not going home. We're going to take you and let you work in the library. That way you can make your balance up and stay in school.
Thanks to 2 librarians, Ross stayed, funding his education through work study in the school's library. He also took on odd jobs to supplement his income, all giving way to his storied history, all part of the fabric of not just BCU, but an HBCU.
I've seen it grow, and I've met a lot of interesting people.
Interesting people making a difference, like Dr. Mary McLeod Bethune, said Bethune-Cookman Dean of Libraries, Dr. Tasha Lucas Yeomans.
I would like to think if it wasn't for her and the connections that she made early on in her life, that some HBCUs may not be still standing, but we're here.
The very first HBCU, Cheyney University of Pennsylvania, is still standing. It was founded in 1837, giving African Americans a shot at a college education. Right now, there are more than 100 HBCUs in the United States, 4 in the state of Florida. Dr. Mary McLeod Bethune first started what would become Bethune-Cookman University in Daytona Beach, Florida, in 1904.
She started the school with $1.50, faith in God, and 5 little girls, and her son, we like to add.
Dr. Yeoman says Dr. Bethune would form lasting bonds with other HBCUs, often sharing resources from time to time. These institutions of higher learning, drawing people from near and far to be part of what many call an unmatched cultural experience.
We talk about the HBCU experience. What is the HBCU experience?
Well, it's one of the most unique experiences that one can have.
Anthony Jones is Vice President of Enrollment Management at BCU. He says their numbers are up, and he expects that to continue because of the high interest in historically black institutions.
At the HBCU, there is an effect where you bring in the culture of the African American experience, and you couple that with a little bit of church experience, and a little bit of down-home goodness and the creativity of our black people, and you put it all in the mix around education and bettering oneself, family comes out of that. And that is at the heart of the HBCU experience.
Well, here I'm not just a member. Like, I know all the faculty and staff, the student body. I just believe it was for me.
For BCU senior Winston Bonnet, that sense of family drew him to an HBCU.
I can speak on Bethune-Cookman. We're really a family. Like, if anything happened, we'll all come together and try to find the solution to the problem.
But it's the legacy, the history, that kept him here.
Mary legacy is why I'm here.
And part of that history, Dr. Bethune's home is still standing on the university grounds to this day.
This is how I remember it looking when I first set foot on campus.
The home now in the process of undergoing a $1 million renovation. And Ross is still here too, standing strong on this campus now for over 50 years.
Homecoming comes around and they say, Ross, you still here? I said, yeah, I'm still here, holding on a little longer. Because they said, well, when you thinking about retiring? I said, I don't know yet because I still feel like I got a little bit more to give.
A bit more to give from the many things he's learned. And if you haven't figured it out just yet, his best friend, Dr. Mary McLeod Bethune's grandson. The two working together in the campus gospel choir.
She just loved that boy to death. It spoiled him rotten. Everything that he wanted, he got pretty much. So he was affiliated with the gospel choir. So in meeting him, I kind of tagged along and fell in love with it. So I became his assistant and we worked for over 30 years until his passing.
While Dr. Bethune, her son and grandson are all gone, their legacies live on in the many students' lives they all touched. Those students like Irvin Ross, who made the choice in trusting an HBCU with his education and lasting career. It's a decision, he says, he's forever grateful for, hoping that the legacy of these treasured institutions will enrich even more lives.
We need this type of institution because we help the underprivileged so much.
In Daytona Beach, Curtis McLeod, Spectrum News.
Black athletes on ice. It's not as common as you would see in other sports, but it's a thing, and its roots date back to the late 19th century. We're taking a look at Black history in hockey when we return in just a few minutes.
Black History Month to me, the first thing that comes to my mind is the fight for equality, and then the perseverance to get there. It's amazing when you think about being slaves, to having the right to vote, to then so many amazing accomplishments. The first Black president, African Americans in space, African Americans in sports. It took a lot of work. It took not giving up. And I hope that people watching this will have that same inspiration to not give up and continue to persevere and continue to make history.
The history of NASA's space program is really interwoven with the stories of African Americans. Over the past few years, NASA has taken steps to recognize more of these hidden figures. For instance, in 2020, the agency renamed its Washington, D.C. base the Mary W. Jackson NASA headquarters in honor of its first African American female engineer. Spectrum News' space expert Will Robinson Smith caught up with a former NASA employee who had a career that spanned over 40 years as a NASA engineer.
Taking a walk with Bill Gary inside the Kennedy Space Center Visitor Complex's Atlantis building is like getting a tour of a time capsule. His fascination with space and electrical engineering took him straight from college in Tennessee to here at KSC in Florida. He spent 40 years at NASA, starting in the late 60s, and helped work on key systems like the crane that lofted the shuttle orbiter.
It wasn't rain, but rather it was a test of the pad's sound suppression system.
And one of his favorite projects, the torrential geysers that dampened the sound of the shuttle engines firing that protected the rocket.
The water acts as an acoustic absorption for the sound, the massive sound that comes out, to keep it from damaging the payloads or parts of the shuttle that are sensitive to sound. The thing that was exciting to me about that was that it's such an integral part of the launch system itself.
Gary says working on big projects, like the mate-demate device here in this model, was one of the many perks of being able to work in the space program. But while NASA did make strides to help with desegregation across the country, that didn't mean it was easy for Black employees.
We didn't talk much about it there, but we all knew that what we did, how we presented ourselves was going to allow others to come after us.
And there were plenty who began blazing that trail early on. Dorothy Vaughan joined the Langley Memorial Aeronautical Laboratory as a mathematician back in 1943, in the height of World War II and the Jim Crow era. She went on to become the first Black supervisor within the National Advisory Committee on Aeronautics, the precursor to NASA in 1949. Engineer Thomas Birdsong joined NACA in 1952. The World War II veteran's contributions to the study of landing gear on planes helped improve the safety of tires for the general public. And before he helped integrate Brevard Engineering College in 1961, which later became Florida Tech, Julius Montgomery became the first African American hired at Cape Canaveral Air Force Station. These days, there are more and more visible leaders of color across the agency. NASA is working on many ways to increase diversity across the board.
And liftoff of Artemis 1. We rise together, back to the moon and beyond.
Including the goal of sending the first person of color to the moon through the Artemis program. And as Gary literally looks back on NASA's progress through programs like Shuttle, he says it's increasingly important for young people to see themselves reflected in NASA's workforce, letting them know that that could be them someday.
For those people, it gives them a real sense that that's something that I can do, that there's somebody that looks like me
that is doing some of the things that I'm hoping to be able to do in the future.
Meaning more giant leaps are still yet to come. On the Space Coast, Will Robinson Smith, Spectrum News.
When you think of African Americans in sports, who comes to mind? Players like Jackie Robinson? But how about these players? Do their names ring a bell? Earl Francis Lloyd, he was the first African American player to play a game in the NBA. Or maybe Fritz Pollard, the first African American to play in the NFL. Here's one you may not be used to hearing, Willie O'Ree. He was the first black player in the National Hockey League. The basketball court and the football field are typically places where we see African Americans shine, but the NHL, they're trying to become more diverse when it comes to hockey players. Our Kathleen Smith introduces us to one such standout player and shares his inspirational story.
The sport of hockey is a dichotomy of sorts. For all of its speed, there has to be skill. And even with all of its toughness, there's an artistry and somewhat of an elegance on the ice. For Tampa Bay Lightning forward Pierre-Edouard Bellemare, hockey is his everything. The sport hooked him at a young age, and it's had a hold of him ever since.
Being French, like soccer is the sport, right? And I didn't really like to run, so already it was a bad tough start for soccer. And so the hockey, nobody knew what it was. There was something about, I don't know, the ice, and it just felt really natural.
Bellemare took an unnatural route to the NHL, spending 8 years in Sweden before making his way to the big league. Throughout his journey, he has always been in the minority on every team he's played on. Born to a white mother and a black father, Bellemare was prepared for what has sometimes been a rough road as one of the few black players in the league. He's heard the taunts, the racial epithets, but thanks to his mom, he knew how to deal with it.
The decision of marrying a black man in a community that wasn't the most welcoming for that way was never something easy on her. And then she realized that, all right, I'm gonna have kids that are they're gonna be mulatto, right? And she's really early on, she had these talks with us to make us realize, that the world is not perfect.
And neither is the NHL when it comes to racial equality. But the league has made diversity a priority with its Hockey is for Everyone campaign. In a league where 97% of the players are white, the initiative is welcome.
It is nice to see faces, people that look like you.
Corey Long covers the Tampa Bay Lightning for NHL.com. In his 9th season with the team, he's seen a lot, including back-to-back Stanley Cup championships. But he's also seen a change on the ice. There once was one. Now the number is in double digits. More than 30 black players occupy spots on rosters around the league. It's a number that is growing.
It's definitely something I notice. You start noticing it more around the league, especially, younger black players that are getting into the league that have a different skill set.
Representation matters because if you can see it, you can be it.
You see a player, you want to emulate that player. Everybody wants to find somebody they can relate to. So it's no different than, say, Tiger Woods when he was playing golf at a high level, that, you get more, once you see that representation out there and it's successful and it's getting coverage, then, you want to be part of that.
Amalie Arena, home of the Tampa Bay Lightning. At any given home game, nearly 20,000 fans pack the stands inside. Add in the millions of TV viewers that watch NHL games every week. That's a lot of eyes watching these players' every move. And more, it's young, impressionable eyes seeing themselves represented on the ice.
I think it's important that this diversity is happening, that, because even just me being here, it's a lot of kids back home that's gonna be college skating, they're gonna be like, I want to be like him.
Bellemare accepts that responsibility and welcomes it. He knows he's helping to blaze a trail for others to follow.
Tipped in front by Bellemare. 1-0 for the Lightning.
We can be a positive picture to help our younger community to maybe have this dream, and maybe one day they will be the one sitting in this chair and being able to, motivate and influence other kids.
In Tampa, Catherine Smith, Spectrum News.
As part of its efforts, the National Hockey League plans to have a Black History tour bus at Amalie Arena in Tampa on March 3rd. Next on Spectrum News, we explore an old Florida tourist attraction built for coloreds, the deep-rooted history of Paradise Park in just a few minutes. Welcome back, everyone. Let's talk about entertainment, glass-bottom boats, jungle cruises, dance pavilions with something fancy like this, a jukebox. Sounds like a lot of fun, right? But for many Black Americans, it was their only option. Paradise Park was indeed a tourist attraction, but it was built for, as a sign once read, for colored people only. Spectrum News attraction insider Ashley Carter has a historical background of this hot spot.
Before the theme parks, Florida was known for its roadside attractions like Silver Springs, but not everyone was welcome. Black people could visit a little-known attraction called Paradise Park. The park, located in Silver Springs, opened in 1949 and offered many of the same amenities available to white tourists, including glass-bottom boats, swimming, and recreational facilities.
Paradise Park was a luxury resort for African Americans because it was during the time of segregation and we couldn't go to Silver Springs.
Cynthia Wilson Graham co-authored the book Remembering Paradise Park after spending more than a decade researching the attraction. Her interest was sparked by a photo she saw at Howard Academy Community Center in Ocala.
There's a picture posted across the hall in the office of all of these women and men on a boat that happened to look like me. And I wanted to find out where this place was because I had been to Silver Springs several times, but I did not know anything about Paradise Park.
She talked with people in the community and even visited libraries across the state just to find more information.
Some of the older individuals in my community started telling me, this is what we did and this is where it is.
Paradise Park attracted 100,000 visitors annually and was an important part of the Black community. It was a gathering place for church groups, a place for family picnics and school field trips.
We're talking about during a time of segregation where Paradise Park was off the beaten path. It was the one place that we can go without being humiliated.
The park closed in 1969 because of integration. Artifacts from the park, including vintage photos and a boat captain uniform, are on display at the Black History Museum inside Howard Academy. And just outside the former entrance to Paradise Park is a historical marker. The inscription reads in part, Paradise Park was regarded by civic, business, and religious leaders throughout the nation as the finest park built specifically for African Americans. In Ocala, Ashley Carter, Spectrum News.
Paradise Park opened May 20th of 1949. It remained open until 1969. Our thanks to Ashley, Trevor, Dahlia, Sandra, Caitlin, Catherine, Curtis, and Will Robinson Smith for their stories tonight. We also have some bonus content for you right now on our website and on the Spectrum News app. Our executive producer, Nathaniel Paul, got exclusive access to the field where the legendary Jackie Robinson once played and talks to the general manager of the Daytona Tortugas on the history of Jackie Robinson Park. It's a story you don't want to miss. So much to soak in, so much to learn about during Black History Month and really all year round in places just like this, the Wells-Built Museum. For all of us here at Spectrum News, we want to thank you for watching. Stay safe and stay informed.